Okay, so here we are for part two, and I was looking for the term diathesis stress model, and it's on page 382. And I'm going to go back to so you can see both slides again. Page 382 clearly defines diathesis right here. And it tells you that this theory says that in adolescents and in adults as well, that depression is kind of predisposed. We are predisposed. There may be some pre-existing, I think the term right here says pre-existing vulnerability. And some of that's true. This is where we talk about nature versus nurture. Um, Biologically, we may have a predisposition. Other environmental issues could be not enough sun, vitamin D deficiency, along with circumstances, family relationships. All of those factors are going to be very, very evident. And in your assignment folder, there are some handouts that I've placed there. And if you look at handout 13.8, it clearly gives you a list of danger signals for depression, warning signs of potential suicide. So let's move on to that next slide. Um, that talks about risk factors as it relates to suicide. It's really clear that we have to be sensitive to what young people are going through. We may think they're just being moody, and we have to be very careful that we pay attention to other life circumstances, what's going on with them. And so we can look at page 378 to kind of talk about, I just love this feature, don't you love it? So I'm turning to page 378. You're welcome to turn there when it talks about different aspects of suicide as it relates to relationships and family stress, um, problems around bullying, date rape, all types of situations. And suicide is one of those things where I often tell my clients, be careful that you don't make a temporary decision or a permanent decision, excuse me. Don't be careful that you don't make a permanent decision for a temporary situation. And for adolescents, it's hard for them to see that change is going to happen. You know, we're older now, so we recognize that stress comes and challenges come, but that change comes as a result of that, and it's not going to remain the same. It's kind of hard to process that. We talked about that cognitive ability, limited, although evolving, and sometimes it's hard for them to see that their circumstances, that the friends that they lost today they may not even know 20 years from now. And so they have these very fatalistic thoughts. Although we talk about them having a sense of immortality, I think by the time they get to the point where they're feeling suicidal, it's because they're not feeling anymore. And your chapter talks about depression that gets so great that young people, they don't feel. They are individuals, they can't feel anymore, and so they're numb to any emotions whatsoever, and that's a very dangerous place to be. And so we see that there are risk factors. These are just some of the risk factors. They are not all inclusive. I like this statement where it says Americans grades 9 to 12, 24% report thinking of suicide, 3% attempt. We talked about that. Girls tend to attempt, boys tend to commit. Current suicide rates for Americans is 4 times the rate than it was in the 1950s, and higher rates in Canada and the U.S. Than other countries. And I showed you guys those diagrams earlier on, and it had to do with homicide, but it's very similar for suicide as well. So warning signs when it comes to really paying attention to a young person who may be having thoughts of hurting themselves, withdrawal from contact with others, sudden swings, giving away things that they really like, personality changes, a sense of helplessness or hopelessness, and they just start to think about or talk about things in very negative light. Now we know that some of that is just plain adolescence, but when it goes on for a period of time, and the DSM 4 and now 5 says we need to look at how long these symptoms have been going on. So it's not just that they're present, but if they've gone on for more than 2 weeks to a month, then you really need to have some concern. And then when we're talking about how do you just come out and provide some intervention, what's going to be really important is that you take the time, and these are the early warning signs. that you stop and you actually ask a young person, have you had thoughts of hurting yourself or harming somebody else? And more than likely, they're going to be very honest. The next question is, do you have a plan? And if they don't have a plan, you may want to you certainly want to take them to the school counselor, because this is beyond your pay grade for sure. But just to get an idea of the severity. And if they don't have a plan, you want to encourage them to talk to the counselor. I would still walk them down. But if they have a clear plan, and they tell you what the plan is, my dad has a gun, or I'm going to wait till my mom is gone and she has all of these meds in her medicine cabinet or things like that, then get very concerned. And you have to right there talk to the student about a plan of action. So it sounds like you're planning on hurting yourself. And do you know that there are numbers there are contact numbers, there are places where you can go to get help? It's going to be really important that you provide them with that information. And I have at the bottom here let me see if I can scroll down, of slide number 36, actually some contacts that you can give them. And so I'll post this in the lecture. I'll make sure to include those links in the lecture at the end of this, in the lecture portion. It's very great for you to have those resources. Okay, let's talk about distinguishing between potential protective factors and risk factors. So we're going to go to slide 40. And over here, we're going to go to page 390 in the textbook. And we're talking about resilience, risk factors, and protective factors. And one of the things I wanted to do in 390 is actually define resilience. So to show you how this course smart works, I just love this. I'm going to type in resilience. I know it's on page 390. Let me see if I can get my cursor to move down to page 390. Okay. Click there. Click. I've clicked. Okay. And I'm going to go over and see if it highlights. Yes, and it highlights the terms for me. That's great. So right here, I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger so you can see it. But the definition is resilience is a term for the phenomenon of young people being able to, despite their challenges and conditions that may make them at risk, they manage to be productive citizens in society, and they make really good decisions, and they have good outcomes, right? And sometimes those good outcomes are measured as notable academic success or social success or economic success. But sometimes it's just that they choose not to get engaged in those external behaviors that would be so easy for them to get, external problem behaviors that would be so easy for them to get involved in. It's promoted by what we consider protective factors that in the face of risk factors, and risk factors could be socioeconomic status, single head of household, family disruptions, domestic violence. It could be all types of things. It's just so, numerous. But in the midst of those risk factors, high school dropout rate, teen pregnancy, date rape, bullying, there are some protective factors, and those protective factors are what we need to focus on and are very important. So it's really important, and this is what I wrote my dissertation on, is what social support is in place. That's one of the factors. So there are several protective factors. There's an internal locus of control, which is the inherent inability to have good self-esteem, a good sense of self. We call those young people, they're grounded because they have a really good sense of who they are despite what their circumstances are. Internal locus of control, family relationships, and then also not only family relationships, but then social relationships. So according to the research in my dissertation, what I talked about is the importance of having strong peer relationships, being in relationships with young people who are doing really great things. Everybody's talking about going to college, and everybody has a job. then those young people tend to do better. Also, having adult figures that may not be family members who can speak positive things into their lives. In my research, I showed that young people who had really good relationships with maybe like their grandparents or extended family members or aunt or uncle or somebody in their community, their pastor or their school counselor. And the population I did my research on was the Dallas kids in Dallas Can Academy. So it became really important for them to have connected with either teachers or counselors. And those young people were more likely to complete their education and do well. And so that's what resilience is all about. And so what we want to do is maybe when you're in school as a teacher or you're working with young people, you want to be that adult that provides the positive reinforcement that gives them a sense of hope and gives them some positive reinforcement and talks to them about how the potential that they have, or you look at their strengths, the things that they're doing right in the midst of a world that may be all wrong. And when you do that, then those young people have a better chance of succeeding. We talked about the life trajectory earlier in class and how their life course, there may be some predispositions, biological, family, parent decisions that would set them up to be failures. But then in their life, there may be some good positive impacts on their life that make them more resilient. And so that's what we want to focus on. Okay, that's the second part of my lecture. I'm sorry I couldn't squeeze this in the first part, but I hope you have a great week. I hope this is helpful. Go to that discussion board, make your video. I'm excited about seeing what you have. Okay, take care.